Hi, this is Jordi from Agents at Work. Today we're talking with Matt from Okareo, a company for agent debugging, building, and error reporting. Hi, Matt.
Hey Jordy, how you doing?
Doing well, thank you. Really excited about having this conversation.
Yeah, this is great. I'm always excited to have a conversation about agents.
Yeah, so I met Matt actually at an event in person in San Francisco about AI agents.
Indeed.
And back then you told me that you have been working in tech for quite a while, and that people were
It
trying to.
shows, huh?
It does. But all that's experience. And you had already like a really good take about how agents should communicate with each other and how people like were not doing the best thing. So the first thing that I like to start always is asking what an AI agent is.
Oh, you go right to the hard question right off the bat. So let's see here. What is an agent? Look like everyone's using this word. Um, I mean, it's being used all over the place. It's the new buzzword, super exciting this year. Agents, agents, agents. But when you kind of peek under the covers and try to understand and tease them apart, there's Andrew Ng's definition of agentics, which has to do with tool use and autonomy and being able to take and sort of affect the outside world. And then there's this sort of growing sense of agents or any sort of multi LLM interaction with some sort of purpose. But there's actually a fairly wide margin between the two definitions, because you can have many models and prompts that are interacting and sort of being pulled together, but it could be deterministic code that knows when to call each one, some sort of DAG that calls this model, then calls that model, and uses this prompt, and uses that prompt. And people are still terming that an agent. So I'm thinking about agents now more as a set of multiple prompts and multiple non-deterministic interactions to generate some sort of very directed user behavior. So that's very generic, it sounds, but I think we need to use a slightly more generic term and just sort of embrace the idea that the word agent isn't as precise as we might like it to be. But in terms of the systems that are quote unquote valid for as agent systems, it's really any system where you're adding complexity, non-deterministic complexity, not just as one prompt in the corner for a little summary, but rather some collection of prompts, some collection of models around behaviors. And then after that, it's the Wild West as people try to figure out how do we put these things together? How do they behave? How do we make sure they stay on track and so forth?
Yeah, I'm sure that after like 100 episodes or so, we're going to be able to put everything together. And I think that the word agent is going to end up being like the word computer. That for many people from the past, if you show them your phone, they will say like, "This computer, it's amazing." So no, this is not a computer or even a calculator. So I think that it's going to happen like something similar. But it's curious because it's literally like evolving through like day by day. Like people try to like attach
Oh
new
yeah.
meaning to the word. So let's see where that
And,
goes.
and they keep trying out new use cases, right? So the use case for agents keeps changing. And I like your comparison to a calculator because back in even for me back in the day, calculators had a certain ceiling of what they could do, and now small form factor compute. I mean, you can my daughter built a little program on her calculator that's a game because of course she's playing the game. It's a calculator because that's the only gaming platform she has available to her in the classroom. So people are going to do crazy things with agents in the same way as they just sort of expand in their capabilities.
And talking a bit about your background, how did you end up working on agents?
Oh, that's a good question. So I started off very much as the engineer and found my way to product management and sort of went back and forth between engineering and product management. And in sort of I'd say mid 22, I was in the C-suite of a company called Sauce Labs, and we were doing quite a lot of interesting work around LLMs, and there was a lot of things going on with AI, and that had we had quite a few AI-based products, ML really based products, and sort of my if you will, my ears kind of came up, and I started thinking like, oh wait, well, what's going on in the space? And so late that year, early 23, I connected with my co-founder. He and I had worked together as engineers many years before. He was at the time a senior director at Facebook, Meta. And so we started just talking about what can be built. And we just started building. you know, we're engineers at heart. We just started building stuff. And then we started to see all these impediments when you're trying to build a complex system. And so that really kind of piqued our interest as entrepreneurs. Like anytime you hit a major problem and you start talking to other people and they're having the same problem, then suddenly, OpenAI gets super exciting, and it just felt like the right time to just, hey, let's just jump in, let's do this, because this is it's the Wild West. It's frankly, we are all honored to be in this moment of huge technology revolution, to be right in the heart and just helping people solve problems and getting to the next stage. So that's really what brought me to it. I just love these challenges, and it just seemed like a moment that couldn't be missed.
Yeah, I think that we are really, really fortunate. I also like computers are doing things today that I knew that we did not have the technology to build that, but I wasn't even sure if the technology could exist. Like I thought that maybe there were some fundamental limits on what silicon can do. And then ChatGPT 4 dropped, and I was like, well, okay. So I think that almost everything a human can do, or everything a human can do, will be doable by a computer. And my life like totally changed. So it's 2023. You leave your company, you talk with this old colleague, and you start building. You said, what did you start building?
Uh, Actually, I think time back to your comment just now, like we were essentially building an enterprise RAG where we were connecting um, Salesforce, and we were connecting Amplitude, and we were connecting the billing systems like Stripe, and trying to pull it all together, as well as all sorts of internal analytics to try to see like, hey, can we create some one a Slack integration, the classic enterprise search, enterprise agent use case, just to see what would that be like. And we got really far, but then it started falling down. It started falling down all over the place, and it was all behavior based. It was all the non-deterministic behaviors. We were writing SQL on the fly. We had certain elements embedding. We were doing on the fly embeddings. We were really trying to push all the boundaries, and we started to see it fall down, not only in the user interactions, it wasn't directed, it couldn't hold a course, it would get pulled off course very easily, but at the same time it did amazing things. It would build, like, you'd ask questions about the link between user flows and onboarding to likelihood to retain a customer based on Salesforce interactions with an AE. Like, that's a question that'd be very hard to answer. You'd have to pull a lot of people together to answer that question in most enterprises, and they could answer it and give you a graph of progression and everything else. It was really cool. So when it got it right, it was amazing. But more often than not, the demos always look great, but more often than not, we could see the flaws. And so we're picks and shovels people, so we started building the layer necessary to actually get it to work, which meant a lot of synthetic data to create scenarios for expectations. Like, this is what we expect it to do. We use synthetic data to generate those scenarios, and then we would actually simulate. We'd put this agent system into the simulation to see if it stays aligned. And we started looking deeply at RAG and the retrieval metrics, and trying to figure out how do we tune these embeddings, and started fine tuning. And so as we talked to other folks, we started to realize, like, that layer of tooling so that developers can actually build to these amazing use cases was going to be a major gap. And so that's what we wound up focusing very deeply on, that layer. It's also what we love. We love building tools. And so uh, the other fun part in that period, we're we are allowing ourselves, not just me, but like everyone is finally starting to allow themselves to ask the question, what's possible? And we're starting to see more and more um, use cases that are pushing the boundaries. It started off very tentative, like, oh, maybe I can make a little search, or maybe I can, pull a couple, elements back and generate, a nice piece of text. But now people are starting to push major boundaries, and I think that's also where the word agent is really jumping up. Is as people are pushing into these new use cases, you need a name for that, and it's not just a feature now. It's much more nuanced than that. And so I think we're only just now getting to the point where people are really pushing the boundaries, and I think it's going to keep going. We're going to keep pushing these boundaries a lot. And so that was the progression in 23. We started seeing all these problems, wanted to fix them, funding, all that good stuff in 23 and 24. And we're just like down the road of trying to help people build all those unusual use cases.
What I really like is that Okareo is like a dev tool and infrastructure company, right?
Yep,
But it's built by people that say like, okay, let's see what we can build with these agents, and started building it and say like, wait a second, there is a missing piece.
that's
But
exactly
you
right.
were actually like the kind of visionaries at the beginning, like people that say like, well, actually this can be built. Then you saw that it couldn't, and you're like, well, but it's only because this piece is missing, and you're solving it for everyone else, which is
And
pretty,
learning
yeah.
all along. Like, so a lot of the problems that existed in 23 aren't problems in 25. And so, that's good and bad. Um, but the principles are the same. Also, I think it's fascinating to participate as the persona of who's building these systems starts to change and our thinking changes with it. If you think about data scientists tend to have a very deep connection to the data. They trust the data they use to build a model. They know how that data was, they know how they cleaned it, they know how they pipelined it to build that particular ML. But you think about a developer using a foundational model, they're just calling it endpoint. They have no idea what's inside that. So it completely changes the trust of that entity, but it also changes how you think about it, using it in your software. If you built a model, in some ways that model is precious, right? You built it just the way you wanted it, and so you use it just the way you expect to. But if you're a developer interacting with an API endpoint, you're frankly going to abuse it. You're just going to put anything at it. You're just going to see what it does, and you're going to push it in different ways. But then when it breaks, you have fewer tools to figure out why, because you weren't really deeply connected to what made it from at the very beginning. And so that shift is where we're focused, is helping that bridge of like, okay, how do we push the boundaries and hold the trust at the same time?
And before this, like we were used to build software, and we already had like a lot of monitoring in place for these kind of things. Can we apply it directly, or there is like some fundamental difference that says like, well, actually, you cannot apply the old ways to the new way of building software?
I think I have two answers to this.
Okay.
Obviously, I have a very strong opinion that there is a new way, but at the same time, we shouldn't just throw out what we know and what we do well. And just because there's a new set of technology doesn't mean you throw everything else away. So I think that monitoring is an interesting topic in this area. The traditional monitoring, which a lot of that is telemetry of one sort or another, and tracing, is incredibly valuable, as is. However, if you imagine a true agentic network, right? So there are essentially four patterns that you'll see agent networks fall into. There's reflection, where there's some sort of task provided, it performs a task, and then there's a judge of some sort that reviews the output and decides whether or not it met the task. There's planning, where there's some sort of agent that builds a plan and then distributes the work to others, and they all perform their plans. Or there's what I would think of as multi-agent, where each agent, in quote, raises its hand to say, hey, I can solve this portion of the task, and they all sort of contribute. And of course, tool use is all in there, et cetera. There's lots of techniques in there. When you think about those kinds of agent networks, um, a simple trace won't give you a lot of information about what's going on. It'll tell you where the uh, LLM call started, and it'll tell you what was generated. So you've got your I/O, but what you really need is information about, we'll call it a session for a moment, but it's really the conversation. What you need is conversational analytics that show you, how did these agents talk to each other? What were they doing with each other before the user finally received the completion at the very end? And here the user is very loose. The user could be another system. But in any case, there's that initial originator of the request that gets back a response. But there could have been a dozen conversation back and forth before the response came back. So it requires a different type of tooling to understand that, but built on traditional concepts. So telemetry is a fantastic concept. You just need to layer on top of it these conversational analytics. Similarly, in terms of traditional thinking, I'll give you two more examples actually. One with deterministic code, when you get a trace and something breaks, you can really look at that trace alone. Now, you might wait for it to aggregate. You might wait for 100 examples of it. That's really more just what's the temperature of this particular problem? Is this like a major issue and it's happening a lot? Is it minor? But for any given single event, you can look at that event and sort of figure out what was involved and tease apart what's going on. But the moment you get into a non-deterministic system, you have to have another lens, which is this aggregate lens to say, where did the conversations go? How many conversations veered off into, I like to joke, avocado smoothies? Like there's a lot of agents that if you start talking to it about avocado smoothies, it'll come back and say, here's a recipe and I love them and say all sorts of crazy things, even though the agent itself doesn't care about cooking and has no concept, but it's easy to pull the prompts off target. So you have to be able to see these clusters so you can focus in, and then you have to be able to tease apart those conversations to figure out which agent was it or which combination of interactions was it that caused this problem. So it's a whole new set of tooling to do that. And we think synthetic data and these other mechanisms and putting these into simulations is a good way to solve it. But the last but not least part of all this is our learned methods of being engineers is also coming into play. So if you go back many years, there was all sorts of advocacy for stage-based QA, where people would go through lots of QA, and then if it reaches a certain percentage, they would promote to production. And that's perfectly valid under certain circumstances. But what we've learned over the years is not every code change needs to follow that pattern. Other code changes should go through canaries. Other code changes should go through, an error reporting mechanism where you just alert on it if it hits a certain threshold. So we're seeing a lot more folks with agents specifically, given the nature of them, wanting to run these sort of real-time experiments because you have to get things into production to find out what they're really going to do. So then it's a matter of thinking about risk, and that's the core of the engineering discipline, isn't it? Right? The understanding risks, balancing systems thinking, and so all of that we need to hold on to. And I am a little worried that folks are doing too much YOLO, just like check it out there, don't worry. And some of that's okay, but I think we need to lean into it, put things out, but we also need to have these sort of listeners attached and these mechanisms attached to see how it goes and where it goes. So make sure we keep it aligned.
I think that like only with this conversation it already shows, and with the product itself, like the experience of building software, and not only experience of years of doing it, but the learnings from it. When you attack a new problem and you say like, okay, so let me like synthesize everything that was fundamental that we can translate here, plus what are the new things that are sprinkles that like maybe helpful. And I think that in your product, like it shows that okay, yeah, like these people are experienced, have done things in production. It's not in a hackathon, just YOLO, let's push this. Even with most of the usage, I would say like they are starting now to be more enterprises that are really looking into this. But at the beginning, of course, it was like some student that said like, do you know what I can do? I can do a bot that does this only with a couple of calls.
I love
And
that though. That's how
yeah,
you know it's that's the fertile ground that we learn from, right? And we're also learning what works and doesn't work because of folks doing that. Whether it's a student or a person who's just doing this in off hours, is trying to figure out, oh, can I go build an app that does, whatever, makes games or does this or that? We need those people leaning in.
and as a high level, people that are using your product, like
Hmm.
what are they trying to solve?
Oh, we're seeing a really broad range of use
Mhm.
cases. Surprisingly broad, in fact. So we're seeing a very interesting set of use cases around parts catalogs,
Mhm.
complex schematics, and interacting with these deep data multimodal data sets where the terminology is very unique to the vertical and the type of content that's returned, product content that's returned. I'm talking about physical products in this particular case, parts, where those parts that are returned have to you can't hallucinate the part. You can't make up a part. It has to be the right one. And then the fitment detail of that part precisely for that machine under those conditions has to fit perfectly. And then you also have to pull up the schematic and other information. And so we're seeing more than one where the they're going deep on these kinds of cases where there are agent networks that are looking at all these pieces, and there's a retrieval component, and there's in fact, typically there's many vectors that they're retrieving against. So they have to figure out the intent, and there's a lot of back and forth with the technician to ask questions like, well, what exactly what machine and what conditions and what brand and what year and all sorts of information before it starts coming back with suggestions. So everything from that to the other end of the spectrum, which is people building agent networks for onboarding, as an example. So we have some folks that are building, they're building agents that can help companies with onboarding users. And so those agents have to understand how to have a reasonable conversation, but they also need to be sort of um, given all this context of the product that they're representing because they're acting as the public face of a product for a company. And so you can imagine that use case, we're two steps away from it, right? We're helping the company that delivers the onboarding agent, but nonetheless, it's a very delicate type of conversation. And so you can see we have many in between. So you can see that that's a pretty broad distance in terms of use case, but they're both agents, they're both autonomous, they have, it's multiple different elements involved. They both involve retrieval, very interestingly, just under wildly different circumstances. Um, and then we also see there's an interesting question on fine tuning, which I know is not really the topic here, but it's a giant question whether to fine tune or not to fine tune and on what conditions you should. Uh, and so we see a lot of folks trying to figure that out. Because of our synthetic data component, we're able to help with fine tuning if that's the choice that's made. Um, and so we do see that sort of range as well of people who are doing prompt tuning, the people who are then going deeper into fine tuning. I'm kind of curious, what do you think about fine tuning?
So I think that it may have its use cases. I think that models are advancing so fast that I don't know if now it's the best time to invest into fine tuning a lot because it's something that
Mm,
will change. So it has so many unknowns that by the time that you have figured it out, maybe there's diminishing returns on that. Of course, if you learn from it, like the next model, you can find it even better. So it may have its use cases. I am a big fan of in-context learning. I think that we are
mm,
going to be able to tell an agent like, okay, so here is all the context. Act under these rules, and we'll be able to do it. But we will see. Like many companies went really deep into it, then they got a bit of cold feet. I still think that there is quite a lot of value, and the reality is that people don't know how to benchmark this stuff. So right
yeah.
now, I would say like, well, I don't know if this is worth it or not, and then I will choose like, well, like I am feeling like no, maybe YOLO it, or yeah, let's do this for like 3 months and see if the results are good enough. There is no benchmarks to know what to expect, or they are not well known. I am sure that there are some
Well,
techniques people know, but
I don't think we're ever going to have benchmarks. And here's why. I don't think they're relevant. I think
Mhm.
baselines are relevant. But benchmarks assume that there's some sort of standard that you can compare yourself to. If I'm building a unique use case, how do I compare myself to a standard, right? I need to baseline how is it performing, and then I need to experimentally change and see if I can, can I lift that performance up over time? I don't know. I agree with you. The fine tuning, I think some people did jump to fine tuning really early, but then the context window expanded so dramatically that now you can just dump in so much information that you can really create this sort of, it's almost like the benefits of fine tuning on the fly. On the other hand, if you're trying to get to scale, there are some specific places where I think fine tuning is just heads and shoulders above everything else. I mean, you can get to you can build take some models and really compress them and condense them down to extremely effective especially for like things like embedding um, in the retrieval stage. You can get to some really high efficiency just at that moment when you're in that one area. And I think this is one of the things that's common at this kind of explosion is fine tuning is a phrase, And then people like attach everything to it, like fine tuning this, fine tuning that. It's like, no, 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 this is a technique. It's a tool. Go use it at the right time. Don't apply it to everything. So I agree with you. Like I I think there's reason to be hesitant to over apply fine tuning. I think you should lean into those big context windows and the various, and you should give yourself like, it's an opportunity cost question, right? You want to give yourself as many opportunities to improve as possible, which means being open to moving to next models.
Yeah, something that is interesting that I know some companies that they are doing successful is what you mentioned, that it's this idea of people usually think about fine tuning so the AI can do X. And it's like, no, like this new model can already do it. But in reality, it's more like, well, this really small model that means like it's more efficient, cheaper, and faster can still do X. So it's not
Yeah.
something that it's enabling a new thing, it's actually making it more effective. And then if it's something that is recurrent, I know that some companies have seen like their bill, like the invoicing going down quite a lot because of
Oh,
that.
yeah, definitely.
They are pretty happy about that.
And the user experience, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
I don't want to wait 2 minutes for the response to come back, even if it's perfect. I don't want to wait that long.
Yeah, there are
So you got
many
to find other
to
ways.
something that is interesting though, because it's the question that I was going to say after, was when you say like they may not be benchmarks. I think that actually your company has the perfect benchmarks per each one of their users.
Or
Because
yes, yes. And that's what I mean by baselines.
yes, okay.
I think this is the one of the missing pieces. If you're doing a POC, all that matters, the outcome is you can demo to your boss and they like it, or you demo to your customer and they like it. That's great. But if you're going down the road of getting to production, I think the missing piece, a lot of organizations are sort of, they're not intentionally avoiding it. They just don't yet, they haven't yet embraced it. Is this idea of constant measurement? You've got to set up baselines, and what makes baselines hard is the academic measurements typically don't apply. You have to come up with metrics that are specific to your situation. We call them checks. But whether they're deterministic or there are other models, however, whatever method you use, you have to start putting those in place on a regular basis. And this goes back already to like what we talked about earlier with existing techniques and tracing and whatnot. If you're getting a trace, that is not equivalent to getting back a real-time evaluation of how your agent performed on a per completion basis, on a per turn basis, and that's really what you need. So yeah, I that obviously we believe in it. That's that's why we're focused there. But I do think people need that.
I think that it's really, really important. And in reality, the main problem is that most of the people, the know-how of how to do this, or that even this is a problem, it's not there. Like the companies don't know how to do this. So, at any point, if you ask them, like, how would you solve this problem? They say, like, I just only know that it's a problem, but I don't have the techniques for it. So even like things like debugging and error reporting that on software would be like 101. For
Yeah.
many LLMs, like we don't know yet how to do that. And then there are some companies like Okareo that, like they are like edgy on, well, we actually know. And we are learning by doing it, but we have a really like good baseline for starters.
And I would add, thank you for that, but I would add
Mm.
that data scientists do know how to do this, but they know how to do it in the context of building models. And so we need to make this sort of mental shift from how do we take that knowledge we've learned, but then apply it to engineering? And many data scientists have a release cadence that is months, sometimes even quarters. But most engineers have a release cadence that's daily, right? That every day they're trying to get something done. Um, Not that data science aren't trying to get something done every day, but it's a different kind of mental model of like how do you deliver? Because the unit size is different. Like
Mhm.
just literally, it's what's the work unit and how big is it? Um, I think we're all going to figure this out. Like it's going to take everyone figuring this out because one thing we've learned, our first attempt at establishing baselines and evaluation took too much effort from the developer and required too much knowledge about the outcomes. And so then we had to really lean heavily into, okay, well, how do we make that easier? How do we make this something that they can just, attach, open telemetry or proxy or whatever, and just start seeing flow. So interestingly enough, we've actually built an agent network. We have a lot of use of AI, but we built an agent network inside of Acario that actually watches the behaviors and then starts to automatically make segments based on interaction patterns and apply judges based on interaction patterns that you can then look at and say, and then you can tweak it. So instead of having to do the 90% work, we're trying to cover at least 80% of that automatically for you and then give you the ability to just kind of focus it in a particular direction.
And is all this only for text or there's multimodal too?
Well, we've been very focused on text up until now, although we've now started to shift into multimodal, especially with figures and images. I was mentioning those use cases previously. So we've definitely moved into that space. We haven't really moved into audio yet, but it's all roadmap. We'll
Okay.
certainly get there.
Do you see like companies adopting this kind of technology, or they are slower and they're also like on text mainly? Like what I have seen is mainly text. And then there are like some specific companies that they are doing like multimodal, but still like it's a small fraction of the total that will be.
I mean, I think we're seeing a reflection of our own general creativity, right? I think there's so much available in text between code generation and all the different interaction patterns there, that we're not even near the edges of what's possible. So I think it's all going to come. And I am seeing folks leaning into audio and
Mhm.
image and other pieces, and some amazing stuff is being done in that space. But I do think it is somewhat lagging just because there's just so many opportunities right now. There's so many ways to rethink everything.
Yeah. That also applies even to the engineer, like doing the architecture of the multi-agent system. Do you know people that are using things like frameworks, or usually people are like coding themselves the stuff? Any patterns that you see that, well, these people are successful doing this? More people should copy that.
Um, every framework that we've encountered, and we've encountered a lot of them, has flaws. I'm not gonna I'm not gonna throw any frameworks under the bus here, but every framework that we've interacted with so far, um, has its issues. And I think that the we see a lot of people building it themselves, figuring out how to do their own orchestration. Um, we've seen some folks who've dipped into a framework and then backed out and tried another one, and then backed out and tried a third one. I just That's all being figured out right now. Um, Especially in the agent world, a lot of the frameworks are around just sort of how you handle those agent patterns. I mentioned like reflection and multi-agent and whatnot. But I would say maybe less than half of the folks that we talk to are in fact using one of those frameworks. I would not say that there's a strong correlation between success and necessarily having to use a particular framework. And I also think that it's interesting. Some of them are very good for non-user facing, like pipelines, or some are good at tools and some on-the-fly tool use. I think we're still missing quite a few pieces in that space.
Yeah, like I mean, it's a really new thing. So it's like even for web frameworks, it wasn't like in the 2000 and it was like, okay, so we already know how to do web now, web development. In fact, it keeps changing for front end and things like that. So
One thing about mobile too, right? We keep
yeah.
seeing new frameworks for interacting with mobile. I think we're going to keep seeing it here. Also, it's a question of what are the pieces that you actually need help with, uh, as you're building agent networks and whatnot.
Um,
So,
what about running them? Because I have seen that there is no like standard framework for that. So right now, what people call an agent, it's basically a program with an API, and then like inside, like the magic is inside. Like they call it an agent or not, depending on what the program has inside. And people are running them like in Amazon Web Service, like in a virtual machine or in a Docker container. Do you know people who are like shipping them in a way that makes more sense, or like it's
actually,
still
I think that's the most engineering bit of the entire, like, that's the most traditional engineering bit. I've not seen that change yet in any significant way. I know people have talked about it. There is an interesting draw towards, like no code agent solutions. And I think that some of those can be amazing. They're like sort of next generation Zapiers, in many cases. I'm yet to see one of those really go to production successfully. Um, Maybe it's just because of where we sit, we tend to be connected directly to engineers, and engineers tend to build as opposed to. But I do think there's an opportunity for business users to kind of construct these sort of short-lived agents that maybe are task-based. Maybe they wake up, do a task, and then disappear, versus sort of obviously the long-lived agents, which are having regular conversations with people, looking at consuming data sets and whatnot. Um, I mean, obviously, there's quite a lot at the lowest layer, but I'm largely seeing people trust the foundational, um, you know, companies to provide that, and or folks who are, helping with Llama and helping at that level. So I'm not seeing that the agent orchestration layer. I'm not seeing that layer change yet. I You and I could both come up with 100 reasons why it should, but I'm not seeing it do it yet. And I think it might as we start thinking about things like memory, or we start thinking about conversational history or time series of interactions. To see how how do interactions change over time? Well, how does that change my network structure? Do I need to, yeah, I don't think we know yet, at least I don't know yet,
Yeah.
how, for example, container orchestration aligns to agent orchestration. I'm not sure they're directly tied just yet,
Yeah.
but we'll see.
I think that that's going to evolve. I'm just asking, in case, like from the trenches, if you have seen people solving this problem. Another one will be authentication. I am really, really interested to see how we're going to solve authentication between agents. You said something that is really, really important, and most of the people miss that it's this idea that they are short-lived, or they
Mm,
may be short-lived. So every credential system that we have today, it's tied to an identity or a program that does one thing. Um, I think that this will change. We will open source something called Sentinel that basically it's based on this idea. And the idea is agents should not have credentials. They should just receive tasks, and each task should have the credentials, like the minimum ones that are tied for solving this task. But we will see how that goes. But I think that there are
that's
many
a great idea.
unknowns. Yeah, we will see. But there is this idea of, yeah, like if an agent can do everything. This happened to me like in the AGI house. I was participating in a hackathon, and it was about AI agents, and everyone was pitching how the agent was going to be able to do everything. So what came to my mind was like, okay, problems. Like the more you tell me that your software does, the more scared of it I am. And it's like, okay, so let's see how can we do some contention here. And then was this idea of, well, this is so generic that it can do everything. Okay, so it has credentials for nothing. And then every
Yep.
task they ask, it's able to perform it. There is some kind of nice cryptography here that they are like macaroons, and the other cookies are called biscuits, that are some kind of smart cookies that the owner of them can generate delegation of them. So you are able to create some other credentials that have more narrow scope of what to do. So you could do things like, I want to go to Vercel. I want to create my website there or to Replit. And then I want them to tell me, okay, you need to change your DNS. I don't want them to instruct me. I want them to give them like something really, really small that this is for changing, for adding add records only for this domain. And they go
Yeah.
and do it for me. Like I don't want to handle that. But I don't want them with access to all the DNS records, or I don't want them to be able to delete records. And for normal software, things like OAuth make sense because it's long-lived application. This application does
Hmm.
this, it's access to this. But we will see how it is for agents that they can be like spawned and deleted like on the fly, and
I
many of them with specific use cases that have not been thought before.
Yeah, and that's a fantastic. I love that. I'm in a very similar way on the retrieval side. We're starting to see people do things like mixed databases that have the vector in a column, and with the vector in the same row is information about authorization for
Mhm.
access to that vector, or information about the evaluation of that vector, so that when you do a retrieval, based on the agent or the user, depending on who's authenticated, you know their authority as you're doing your vector search, and you can automatically not return particular vectors if the person wasn't authorized to get to those vectors, even if they were the best match in your K result. So you could think of you can think of like as a filtered, K is the term for how many come back from the retrieval from the store. You could think of it as, well, I requested 10, but I got back 4 because 6 of them were actually, they're there.
Yes.
Like maybe number 2, 3, and 5 are all shadowed, but you can't see what's in them because you weren't authorized to see those elements. So we're starting to see this sort of interesting. This is why it's an engineering problem. This is why, like, to me, these are engineering problems versus data science problems. This is how developers think about, like, how do I interact with the system? Like, okay, the model has a job. And I love this notion of authentication around short-lived agents, because I think it's absolutely the way agent networks are going to develop in the future, as they're going to be spawned on tasks based on orchestration, based on a plan. You're going to spawn them. They're going to go perform the task and then go away. You're going to need to know what they did. You're going to need to be able to articulate what they should be able to do. Like that whole life cycle there needs to be traced. I love this idea of the authentication
Yeah,
on the
makes a
fly.
lot of sense. If you want more hot takes, I also think that most of them are going to have only one endpoint, and it's gonna be session ID authentication and plain text, and then they're going
Hmm.
to be able to do it. Like that's actually how it works with my wife when she instructs me things. I don't have an API that she calls. She just uses like normal text.
I was going to say,
Um,
she has an API. It's right here. It's my
yeah, with the
phone.
phone.
And it works through text.
But there is no JSON. She just like instructs what she wants, and at most, what there is like a forward and back of, sorry, how I do this, and then usually she's right, so I just go and do it. But I think that with agents, it may end in this direction, but until now, I have not seen it yet. So we will see how things evolve.
Well, and I think we're going to start to see memory. We're going to
Yeah.
start to see this notion of I performed a task, here's how it ended, it got used or didn't get used. That gets persisted independently of the agents themselves. So the sort of memory is its own persistence. Then the next time there's a request, you pull out the memory. That's one of the in context. Like one of the things you drop into in context is, well, this is what happened in the past as helpful, direction for this next task that's coming up.
It
Um,
makes a lot of sense. So, last question for closing, because
yeah.
we are on time now. I would like to know what happens when a new model is released with Okareo. Like, what happens to the users? Like, they are able to access it and then they see all their metrics going up, or we are not seeing that.
um, well, not every model is better than the model that came before, so we should be careful there.
And how do
One
they
of the things,
know?
yeah, one of the things we see people do immediately is they start running experiments. So because of the scenario concept, you can actually take traffic and just rerun it as though on the new model, and then compare how the traffic would have performed on this new model if you'd had it when performing those tasks. And that gives you, again, it's baselines, right? So that gives you from your own usage and traffic, you have a baseline, you can try the other model, and then we have these things called scorecards, and you can go side by side and see like, okay, this is where the model would have done better. This is where the model would not have performed as well. And yeah, so we actually we it is a fundamental idea in Acario that models are going to keep changing. And so we've built it in a way where we expect that to happen. So yeah, we see a big flurry of activity when there are new models that are exciting.
That's really, really important. Like for me, like I am an entrepreneur myself, and something that is really, really funny. We are on payments, and most of the people that are trying to play in our ground, what they say is like, okay, so Visa is dead. They are not going to do anything, and we are the new thing. For us, it's the opposite. I say like, well, when Visa does something, should make our life better, and I think that this is the way to scale. There are many companies that try to solve problems from LLMs with the limitations that they have right now, counting that they are not going to get better, and then they get like over like they get destroyed
Yeah,
after like one release. It's
yeah.
good to build in the way of saying like, no, 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 this is the trend. It's going to get better. Now, how
We
we
should
can
assume
even
that.
improve that?
Yeah, I agree. I agree a lot. This is
Excellent, man.
absolutely expected.
So thank you very much. Really nice talking to you. I guess that in the future we can do another one. And
Sounds
if
great.
we want to learn more about your company, how can we do that?
Oh, sign up. That's Okareo.com. So Okareo.com. And yeah, or reach out. We'd love to help. We'd love to hear about like how people are taking on new tasks and what kind of challenges they're having. So yeah, happy to talk to folks. Thanks,
Excellent.
Jordy.
So see you soon. Have a good one.
All right.
Bye.
You too. Bye.